In northern Mozambique, civilians flee to safety in the town of Pemba, only to face the threats of the coronavirus.
Aid for rice farmers in Kano State through the Anchor Borrowers Scheme. Local farmers receive farming equipment and other forms of support. But will it ensure quick recovery from shortages caused by COVID-19?
Targeted campaigns spreading disinformation on social media amid protests against police violence and racial injustice. Is the aim to fuel racial bias by using fake news and manipulation?
Hello and welcome to Africa 54. I'm Chamberlain Oso at Channels Television here in Lagos. I'm joined by Vincent Makori at Voice of America in Washington.
Thanks. I'm Vincent Makori, happy to be with you again for another edition of Africa 54. Now, due to the global outbreak of COVID-19, the Voice of America has reduced staffing at VOA headquarters in Washington. So as you see, our broadcast will look a little different today and in the near future. We appreciate you staying with us on Africa 54. Let's start off with the latest from Nigeria. Channels Television of Lagos brings you that story.
Rice farmers in Kano State, northern Nigeria, are getting farming equipment and other forms of support from government through the Anchor Borrowers Program scheme. The government program aims to increase the capacity of smallholder farmers by providing necessary support. The intervention is expected to ensure quick recovery from shortages in food production caused by COVID-19. Channels Television's correspondent Nachin Vincent compiled the report.
Poor access to farming inputs and equipment, or the lack of it, limits the capacity of small-scale farmers, especially those in rural areas. The impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on farming activities has worsened the situation, reducing farmers' access to agricultural needs and further reducing their production output. As the new farming season approaches, the federal government is positioning rice farmers in Kano, one of the major food producers in the northern region, for a productive planting season. The Central Bank of Nigeria, via the Anchor Borrower Scheme, is distributing fertilizer, seeds, herbicides, water pumps, sprayers and chemicals to 36,000 rice farmers in the state.
Because of the lockdown, nations are locking down their borders. No international trade going on right now. So those countries that we are relying on to be importing our food, basic food, wouldn't have been able to do that. So thank God, now Nigeria is self-sufficient in terms of rice production. And if you want to really know the effect on the poor farmer, on the peasant farmer in Kano State, I think you should ask them and they will tell you, they will give you the testimony that yes, it is really impacting their life positively.
This intervention is part of ongoing efforts to increase Nigeria's capacity for local production of rice, a staple consumed all over the country.
If a farmer cultivates, for instance, 1 hectare, he has to pay in 3 installment payment, whereby at the first time when he cultivates, he is supposed to give about 30% of the input he cultivates, not money. We are not looking for money, we are looking for the rice. The rice paddy he grew, he will give us 30% out of 100, whereby when he do the second cultivation, he will pay another 30%. Then the last one will be 40%. He has already finished making his own payment. Now he can request for additional loan. If you do 1 hectare, then he will probably do 2 hectares.
The beneficiaries consider the gesture not only as a vehicle for a quick recovery from the impacts of the pandemic, but a good harvest ahead.
I have figured out I get this. That is why we are thank you to the RIFAN and the CBN Bank and the General Muhammad Buhari.
The Anchor Borrower Scheme was set up primarily to provide farm input in kind and in cash to smallholder farmers to boost food production in the country. At harvest, Beneficiary farmers supply their produce to agro-processors, who in turn pay the cash equivalent to the farmers. This arrangement ensures there is a market for farmers' produce and money in their pockets.
With the easing of restrictions, focus is on reviving different sectors of the economy, particularly those that were hardest hit. And now to talk more about boosting agriculture, we're joined by Zanal Hassan, who is an agriculture consultant. He joins us from our studios in Abuja. Welcome to Africa 54. Now, with the rainy season, many small-scale farmers can participate in planting, unlike in the dry season, where farming, the availability of water can be a challenge. How much impact do you think the CBN's Anchor Borrowers program can have on yield harvests?
Yes, the rainy season offers an opportunity for majority of farmers, especially smallholder farmers, to go back to farm. This is a season of high productivity where a lot of activity is being engaged, both from the input companies, from seed companies, fertilizer companies, pesticide companies, get busy down to the farm labor, farm support services, tractors, extension workers, name them. Now, all of this contribute to high productivity during the rainy season. And so our smallholder farmers are always very busy. Now, with the Anchor Borrowers intervention, the Anchor Borrowers has over the years being the tool that has supported farmers with input on loan, low interest loan, while they are able to use it to access inputs such as fertilizers, such as seeds, such as pesticides. Now, this has helped them to be able to maximize or optimize their yield, and this yield has enabled them to also be able to pay back. And so it is important that farmers have access to this input, because it is the input that will ensure that they get bumper harvests that will enable them to pay back their loans, as well as have enough for themselves and for their families. Definitely, the Anchor Borrowers will go a long way in supporting farmers achieve good yield.
Well, small-scale farmers can play a bigger role in food security if they can adopt more efficient farming methods. How much is being done to equip the farmers with up-to-date farming techniques?
Yeah, smallholder farmers in Nigeria have been battling with hope for a very long time, and very minimal technology in terms of technology they use on the farm, and this has also contributed to high cost of production, also low yield in terms of what they get out of their farms. It is important that that effort is being put in place to help them optimize some of these things. One of such efforts that needs to be done is extension. Extension offers the farmer advice, for either for weather or for production technicalities, or for them to be able to know what to do in case of pests, in case of one attack on the farm or the other. Now, when this is lacking, it is a big challenge. Well, across the states, some states have some good extension services that they are offering to farmers. We have also private sector initiatives that are also enabling farmers to access some of these services, which has also been helpful. We've seen farmers in Kaduna who have been able to increase their yield from minimal 3 tons to 4, 6, some even achieving 8 tons of maize production. We've also seen reasonable increase in yield also for rice across different parts of the country. Now, this is as a result of some of the effort both from the public sector and from the private sector initiatives that has been helping some of these farmers. So more need to be done in order to help farmers access better technology, access also better inputs, also accessing them right on time so as to be able to maximize it well.
With the lockdown and the restrictions on international trade, that means farming inputs were not coming into the country. What can be done to prevent such a situation, especially when you consider the adverse impact it can have on food production?
Yeah, the lockdown has affected the input market, and we have seen some brand of fertilizers are not covered under the presidential initiative. Prices going as high as 12,000, 13,000 for SSP, for the diammonium phosphate fertilizers. This is very serious, and also some inputs not being able to reach farmers in interior locations because of lockdown. It has greatly affected farming activity. Even farm labor has now gone so high because accessing laborers, you have to go very far to bring in labor, which has not been the case before. So I think that government need to continue to encourage movement, continue to encourage farmers in whatsoever way possible, especially with the security agents, to allow farmers and farm labor to be able to access farms, access locations where they'll be able to get jobs to do. This will help a long way and will help bring down the cost of input and cost of labor.
Mr. Zainal Hassan, an agri consultant, thank you for talking to us today on Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
We want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we cover. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54, and check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. After the break, in the wake of global protests following the death of George Floyd, sweeping legislation is introduced in the U.S. to combat police violence and racism. Welcome back to Africa 54. I'm Vincent McCory in Washington. After global protests against racism and police brutality, hundreds gathered in the U.S. states of Texas and North Carolina to say their final goodbyes to George Floyd, who died after being in police custody. In Washington, D.C., House Speaker Nancy Pelosi introduced sweeping legislation to combat police violence and racial injustice. VOA correspondent Maria Diallo reports.
We are here to honor George Floyd.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi led House and Senate Democrats in a moment of silence at the Capitol's Emancipation Hall. They took a knee for nearly 9 minutes to symbolize the length of time prosecutors say George Floyd, handcuffed and face down, was pinned under a white police officer's knee before he was later pronounced dead at a Minnesota hospital. Floyd's death sparked worldwide protest against police brutality and racial injustice. Over the weekend, thousands more continued to protest. Floyd's death also prompted the National Football League Commissioner Roger Goodell to say that the league was wrong for not listening earlier to players fighting for racial equality.
We, the National Football League, believe Black Lives Matter. I personally protest with you and want to be part of the much-needed change in this country. Without Black players, there would be no National Football League. And the protests around the country are emblematic of the centuries of silence, inequality, and oppression of Black players, coaches, fans, and staff.
Meanwhile, in Minneapolis, Floyd's girlfriend and others gathered at a park on Saturday to remember Floyd and release balloons to honor lives lost at the hands of law enforcement.
Floyd is here with us. He loves us, and I've been wanting for a long time, and whatever religion you are, however you pray, I've been wanting to thank Father God and be with a group of people that love him and support us, and just thank Father God. Thank you, Father God, for giving us Floyd.
Floyd was also remembered in his North Carolina hometown by mourners who waited hours for a glimpse of his golden coffin. And in Houston, Texas, the final of a series of memorials in Floyd's honor, the public was able to view his casket at the Fountain of Praise Church. Floyd will be buried at the Houston, Texas Memorial Gardens Cemetery, where he will be laid to rest next to his mother. Mariama Diallo, VOA News.
An indigenous diagnostic firm in Ghana has developed a cheap, rapid testing kit for COVID-19. If approved by health authorities, as expected, the test kits will complement a tracking app earlier developed by the same company, which could help ease pandemic restrictions in the country.
Ghana's homegrown in-cash diagnostics expects approval for its rapid antibody test kit for the new coronavirus from regulators by the end of July. The test uses finger prick blood to detect two types of antibodies produced by the body when it is fighting off COVID-19 infection. The company believes the test kits could help health authorities plan the easing of restrictions.
In developing the test, we are looking at 4 basic components. We have the sample pad where the sample is kept. We have the conjugate pad. The conjugate pad basically contains the reagents that react to give you the result. The nitrocellulose membrane is where the positive and negative, it will tell you whether it's positive or negative. And then the absorbent pad would basically pull the excess fluid.
Ghana has seen one of the highest number of positive COVID-19 cases in West Africa at nearly 10,000. It has begun a phased easing of restrictions put in place in early March to curb the spread of the disease and plans to reopen schools and universities from June the 15th. Ghana's President Nana Akufo-Addo has said the country will invest and ramp up local manufacturing of health equipment, including gloves, masks and scrubs, while increasing tracing and testing for the virus.
The utility of the antibody test is in public health decision making, it's in looking at the extent of spread, it's in looking at who has been exposed, and it's looking at making an antibody map of the various communities, various countries, various cities, to be able to know when and how to ease restrictions to ease the various restrictions that have been put in place by the various governments in different countries.
The company is also working alongside developers in Nigeria, Cameroon, South Africa and Senegal, backed by the World Health Organization, and a seed fund of $10,000 on a mobile app that aims to trace potentially high-risk people. Fed by information from users, the app will show areas in the community where vulnerable people are who have not tested for antibodies, and people who have antibodies, and those who are at low, medium, and high risk. Ghana so far tested 233,734 people. Founded in 2002 in Ghana's second largest city, In-Cas Diagnostics, which is already producing pregnancy test kits, says it can manufacture 50,000 test kits and hopes the FDA will approve it within the next few weeks.
At this time, we remind you to visit our website, channelstv.com, for news and other programming around the clock. You can also find us at youtube.com/channelsweb. Still to come, some cafes in Egypt turn to selling vegetables and fruits to remain open following a ban on public gatherings to stop the spread of COVID-19. We'll bring you details and other stories in a moment. Some cafes in Egypt have found creative ways to stay in business after the Egyptian government placed a ban on public gatherings to stop the spread of COVID-19. Rather than close shop, many coffee shops and restaurants have started selling vegetables and fruits. Take a look.
Some smart coffee shop owners in Egypt's Greater Cairo have switched to selling fruits and vegetables as an alternative source of income after the government shut down cafes and restaurants as part of efforts to combat the spread of the coronavirus. 36-year-old coffee shop owner and father of 4, Mohammed Sabri, says he was driven to selling produce to avoid completely closing down.
What made me think of this idea is that all of us have children and homes. If we don't work, we will not be able to eat in these times. The coronavirus has ruined the country, not just us. all coffee shops have closed and 90% of us won't open again. I have to think of something to feed myself and my children.
Egypt has been hit hard by the coronavirus, experiencing a surge in daily registered cases over the past 2 weeks, despite government efforts to impose strict measures. In March, Egypt grounded international flights, shut down schools, limited restaurants to delivery services, and closed cafes, which has cost some small businesses their only source of income. For the few cafes now selling fruits and vegetables, their daily wages are not the same, but they know it's better than none at all.
We were working, we were okay and making money. Everything was going well. All of a sudden, we found ourselves from one situation to another. Workers who went home with 100 EGP can't find 10 EGP to go home, so we had to start any project, even though there are still difficulties and losses, because we have never worked in this industry before.
While several cafes have switched industries, most have completely closed down, with little certainty over their abilities to reopen.
Now, amid protests over police brutality and racism that have broken out across the United States and around the world, experts say they are seeing an increase of targeted campaigns to actively spread disinformation. As Maria Prus tells us in this report narrated by Anna Rice, one aim is to undermine social cohesion by making people believe there is no objective reality.
Miriam Gagushashvili, who is from Georgia, says in discussions with her immigrant friends about the George Floyd protests, she noticed they tended to focus on the violence and looting instead of talking about the tragedy that led to the demonstrations. To counter this, Gagushashvili created a closed Facebook group for Eurasian immigrants, where she talks about social and racial justice.
We are from the region that has experienced colonialism, experienced ethnic oppression, experienced police brutality, authoritarian government. But on the other hand, at least some of us in our region who have white privilege, we have not experienced racial discrimination and racial profiling. We haven't been in the shoes of Black African Americans who have for centuries have been through slavery, lynching, killings, police brutality that never goes punished.
These issues of racial and social justice have been targets of disinformation campaigns spread on social networks. The aim, to fuel racial bias by using fake news and manipulation. A recent example was the DC Blackout Twitter hashtag that falsely claimed authorities blocked the signals of cell phones and other devices during a Washington, D.C. protest to stop the reporting of any incidents of police brutality. Alex Engler is with the Brookings Institution.
The DC Blackout campaign and the other propaganda campaigns that we saw surrounding the DC protests do certainly feel reminiscent of recent foreign influence campaigns that are oriented towards driving wedges between American citizens in particularly polarizing issues.
The Washington Post newspaper reported the DC Blackout campaign was started by an account with just a few followers and then exploded in popularity as it was pushed by fake accounts. The goal is to confuse people so they can't tell what's real and what is not, says Patrick Warren of Clemson University.
Undermining social cohesion to make people believe that it's impossible to find out the objective truth about things and to not even try. Let's go back to 2016 and the IRA the Internet Research Agency operation in 2016. We saw accounts on both sides of the political spectrum, both of them attacking the media, one from the left, one from the right.
Warren says disinformation can be more dangerous when it comes to topics like vaccinations or the COVID-19 pandemic.
What is the transmission rate of COVID-19? I have no idea. People don't really know. It depends on all kinds of things. And it makes that uncertainty leads to a breeding ground for disinformation. Whereas things like, was there communication shut down?
Experts say social media platforms are getting better at taking down fake posts and blocking bots. But such posts still appear, especially in the middle of large social movements.
If you were already protesting in DC, you were already very angry, understandably, at police brutality, you were more likely to be critical of government action and very prepared, especially after these violent police-citizen interactions, you were particularly primed to believe that the government would do something as extreme as cutting off all the communications and then doing something nefarious to the protesters.
Both experts agree that it is impossible to completely get rid of disinformation, but it helps to try and manage disinformation outbreaks. They advise people to pause and assess what they're reading and examine their own internal biases to prevent being manipulated. For Maria Prus in Washington, Anna Rice, VOA News.
Well, and that's our show for today. You can find all the continent's top news and world news online at voaafrica.com. Check it out. I'm Vincent McCory in Washington. Channels Television has our last word from Lagos.
Well, many thanks, Vincent. We look forward to bringing you another show next week. Remember, channelstv.com is your source for news and other programming. I'm Chamberlain Oso. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.